All right, so today's PLC, we're going to be talking about Marzano's vocabulary instruction and how you can implement this into your classroom. So on our agenda today, we're going to introduce the PLC goal, which is Marzano's vocabulary. We're going to review the 6-step vocabulary process, discuss implementation during weeks 1 and 2 of implementing this into your classroom. We're going to share reflections and instructional adjustments, review student outcomes, and then discuss next steps for continued implementation in the process. All right, so I'm committed to creating an engaging, research-based vocabulary instruction that empowers every student to become a confident communicator and a lifelong learner. And that's what you're here to do as well. Through continuous reflection, collaboration with colleagues, and implementation of effective instructional practices, I'm going to strengthen vocabulary development, improve literacy outcomes, and provide equitable opportunities for every student to succeed. So I will foster this in a classroom culture of growth, curiosity, and high expectations that inspires lifelong learning. So that's your goal today. That is what you are going to be gaining out of this PLC. All right, step 1. So very first, when we're doing our PLC, we need to identify the need. For me, you all know, I teach kindergarten. For kindergarten students, demonstrating difficulty understanding and using academic vocabulary during whole group reading instruction and classroom discussions. So I've identified the need. My evidence that I have is limited use of content vocabulary during discussions, difficulty explaining the meaning of unfamiliar words, reduced comprehension when vocabulary is unfamiliar. So for you, you're going to do that with 5th grade, you're going to do that with 3rd grade. Very similar. You're going to identify your need and find your evidence that you need to be included. Step 2. So we're going to review the research by Robert Marzano regarding explicit vocabulary instruction. So we're going to find our research findings. Students need to repeat exposure. We know this. Vocabulary instruction should include visual representations. Students' interaction and discussion is improved retention. Multiple exposures increase long-term understanding. We know all these things. So your step 2 is just putting your research findings into place. Step 3. We've decided to implement this 6-step vocabulary process using weekly vocabulary words from HMH into reading series selections. So that's what we use. That's our curriculum. We're going to start out with our strategies included. We're going to do our student-friendly definitions, our visual representations, our student drawings, our peer discussions. We're going to pull in those Kagan strategies. We're going to use our vocabulary games and review our activities so that your students can learn these high-yield vocabulary words when you're teaching them. So that's your step 3. So let's talk about our implementation of steps 1 through 3. This is what you're going to go back to your room and do. We're introducing new vocabulary words, steps 1 through 3 that we just talked about. So let's talk about these, and we're going to identify you as students in this classroom. Our vocabulary words are predict, character, setting, compare, and describe. Our activities for this are going to be teacher is explaining each word. So you're going to explain each word very quickly, nothing too detailed. Students are going to restate the definitions in their own words. So then this is when you are going to give the textbook definition of the word. Students are going to take their notebook. They're going to restate the definition in their own words or in their groups. And then they're going to create an illustration for each vocabulary word. So something that they think of when they see this word, not a specific illustration that you might be choosing, something that they think of. That will help them learn it. So, what we observed when students do that is students were highly engaged with drawing activities. They began using vocabulary words during discussions because they were trying to come up with things to do, to draw, and to use for this word. So the vocabulary words are being used. They're coming up with pictures to describe these vocabulary words, which is putting that ingrained in their mind, their understanding, they're making connections. So these visual supports increase comprehension, and that is proved and been shown to do. So now we're going into implementation 2. We're implementing steps 4 through 6 of Marzano's process. which is our vocabulary notebooks, our partner discussions, our vocabulary games and movements and activities, our review, dear read aloud discussions with you. So things that I observed in my kindergarten classroom was they demonstrated increased confidence using these vocabulary orally. Once we have done steps 1 through 3, then we've moved on to our notebooks, we've moved on to our Kagan shoulder partners, we've moved on to our games, our activities. They have mastered this word. They're more confident when they're using these words orally. Students retain the vocabulary from the previous week. Doing these small 6 steps in your everyday vocabulary lessons are going to increase the students' vocabulary orally. So, when I did this, what worked? Visual representations increase the engagement, obviously. It does with me, and it does with a lot of students. Students' discussion strengthened and understanding. They were able to use this in sentences. We repeated the exposure, improved the retention of the word. Now, the adjustments that I had to be made was maybe reduce the number of words introduced each week from 5 to 3 to allow a deeper instruction. For me, kindergarten, we may introduce 2 words a week. For 5th grade, we may introduce 10 words per week. It's just based on that differentiation of that. So we're incorporating the vocabulary into morning meanings and centers. It doesn't have to be a lesson. It's just a really quick, simple, easy tidbit that you're putting into your lessons. So our next steps. Students demonstrated improved understanding of vocabulary words. They're using these academic vocabulary more frequently during discussions, and vocabulary retention has improved with repeated exposure. We need to continue this implementation through the school year, expand vocabulary notebooks, incorporate vocabulary into writing activities, and share strategies with grade level teachers. So you're going to find when you're teaching this in your classroom that maybe one thing works for you and another works for another. That's when you work together in your PLCs and you discuss how this might work, how that might work, and how you can combine those and marry those together for the perfect strategies. So today, we've talked about these 6 steps. We've provided an opportunity to discuss the vocabulary instruction and the early literacy development. I think that you all have responded positively to that. It's important that we provide feedback, we continue to collaborate, we implement across grade levels to promote consistent vocabulary instructional practices across grade levels, and then as well laterally throughout grade levels. So thank you all so much for being with me today, learning about Marzano's 6 steps of vocabulary strategies, and I hope that you implement these in your classroom, and we will come back middle year and talk about it. All right, thank you all.